Gosh, a farmer that doesn't even have a degree? A filthy woman covered in dirt? No thank you.
I wasn't quite looking forward to this arranged date to begin with. My date sat across from me, and the moment I told him that I ran a fruit farm, he rejected me with a loud voice. My mom and I pour our hearts growing and harvesting our produce, yet he even threw our strawberries at us. I was taken aback. I was speechless at first. As I stood there shocked, he sneered and left the room. But a few days later,
I got transferred to some rural, remote area. You must have done something.
I got a call from him and he was enraged. He went off ranting at me. I waited for him to run out of breath so I could explain myself. When he found out the truth about me and our matchmaker, he became flustered. My name is Jennifer Henderson, 27 years old. My family runs a rare fruit farm. Running a fruit farm, my parents never got a day off, but they always loved working on their farm and never complained about their work. I would join my parents at work and help them every day after I got back home from school. Before I even knew it, my dream was to succeed my parents and become a full-fledged fruit farmer. However, everything changed after one tragic day. Just as I started 5th grade, my father collapsed. We rushed him to the hospital, but we found out that he was in the terminal stage of a severe illness. Apparently, he had been having symptoms for a while, but kept them to himself, because he did not want me and my mom to get worried. He got hospitalized right away, but despite being treated, he passed away after a few months of battling his illness. My mom and I were now in charge of our fruit orchard. Even as a 5th grader, I could see how tough it was for my mom back then. She lost her husband, and now she had to work as a fruit farmer on a large plot of land, practically alone, all by herself. I am nothing but grateful to my mother who raised me single-handedly even under such circumstances. Despite having only one parent, I never felt disadvantaged and I was able to start high school. I chose an agricultural high school because I wanted to help my mother. With my classmates in high school, I was serious about my studies, so I could help my mother out as soon as possible. After graduating high school, I started working at our family's fruit orchard right away. I wanted to protect their orchard, so I actively incorporated what I learned at school and what my fellow farmers I met through school taught me. One of the things I incorporated was promoting our fruit through social media to get more people to know about it. This continuous effort apparently paid off, and word about our orchard slowly started spreading through social media. After that, we set up a direct sales store and started selling our unsightly fruit there. We decided to sell our fruit that was still great in taste but had lost its market value due to deformities or damages. To our surprise, it was quite popular. And not only our neighbors, but also people from far away started coming to our store. The store took off after several trial and errors, and we received positive comments from our customers too. A few years passed like that, and one day my mother said, "I'm glad things are going well," as she let out a sigh of relief, to which I agreed. Then one of our regular customers, Mr. Miller, brought up a topic saying, "I have something I'd like to discuss. Jennifer, are you interested in trying a blind date?" A blind date? Mr. Miller is a refined gentleman. He always buys a lot of our fruit. Mr. Miller looked a bit troubled, nodded, and smiled. Apparently, someone he knows suggested arranging a blind date for me. Honestly, I wasn't interested in going on a blind date anytime soon, but Mr. Miller is our precious regular customer. I wanted to help him out, if there was anything I could do. "He's said to be a nice man. If you don't feel any spark after seeing him, you can turn him down," said Mr. Miller, and now it was even harder to refuse his offer. Well then, I'll try seeing him. With a light heart, I decided to accept the proposal for a formal meeting. After a while, the preparations for my date started in earnest. That being said, Mr. Miller did most of the preparation for me. I felt bad about it, but he took on the task saying, "I'm the one who suggested you the date," according to Mr. Miller. The mediator from the other party, who brought the blind date proposal, also seemed to be pleased that I accepted. Seeing Mr. Miller's relieved face, I felt that I could be of some help to him. The blind date took place in a luxury hotel in downtown, something like a high-end hotel in Manhattan. On the day, my mother and I left home early in the morning, and when we arrived at the hotel with time to spare, we were guided by a staff member to a private room. I was nervous waiting for my date. Edward Jefferson was the name of the gentleman I was meeting, an elite from a major food manufacturer. I was well acquainted with his company because of my work, but since I hadn't interacted much with them before, I was slightly on guard. In an attempt to shake off my anxiety, I shook my head lightly and waited for Mr. Jefferson and his party to arrive. About 5 minutes had passed from the appointed time. The door opened and 2 men and women, led by a young man, came to our table. It was Mr. Jefferson and his parents. "Nice to meet you. I'm Edward Jefferson. I'm honored to meet you. I've been looking forward to this day." "I'm Jennifer. Likewise. I look forward to spending time with you today." We introduced ourselves briefly at the table. When Mr. Jefferson finished introducing himself and fell silent, his parents seated next to him spoke next. "We have always been committed to providing our children with the best education from a young age in order to raise excellent children. I had heard that he was an elite from a major food and beverage manufacturer, so I had expected him to be an excellent individual from an early age. However, I didn't expect his parents to start off with such a statement. My mother and I were slightly surprised and responded with, "Oh, really?" Edward himself was also nodding to his mother's words. From there, an unbearable amount of boasting about the Jefferson family began. From the heroic tales of their ancestors dating back to the feudal era to their recent trips to overseas resorts, they went on and on. My mother and I just nodded in agreement, and my neck hurt from all the nodding. I had heard from Mr. Miller that they were good people, but I was worried that the meeting would end with just listening to their stories. However, while the family was getting all chatty, they suddenly turned to me as if they remembered something. "By the way, what was your profession, Jennifer?" I thought Edward should have been informed about my occupation beforehand, but I replied once again, "I'm a fruit farmer." Then Edward's expression froze for a moment. "Huh?" As I was wondering, Edward looked at his parents, his face a mix of disbelief and curiosity, and asked me again, "Are you really Jennifer?" "Yes, I am. I am Jennifer." Even when I said that, Edward had a look of disbelief. "And you run a fruit orchard?" "Yes. My parents originally ran the orchard. I went to an agricultural high school, and since then I've been running my parents' orchard. I lost my father at a young age, and because it's been just my mother and me, I've always wanted to be a help to her." As I explained my background, Edward's expression gradually changed. He looked at me as if he was seeing something unpleasant, and his parents next to him had the same look. Although I found his reaction a bit strange, I called over a staff member and asked him to bring something I had arranged beforehand. "These are the strawberries that we grew at our place. Please try them if you would like." On each of their plates there was a single splendid strawberry. "These are the finest strawberries from our orchard." However, upon hearing this, Edward's face twisted instantly. "Are you looking down on me? It's decent courtesy to present them in a wooden box." Edward grabbed a strawberry and threw it at me. The strawberry that hit my chest squished and its juice splashed. Ah! It all happened in an instant and I couldn't understand what was happening. As my mother and I stood there dumbfounded, Edward and his parents began to speak, still angry. "I got an offer from my boss to see you, which is why we are here. I thought you were some corporate heiress, but you're a farmer?" "Excuse me, what are you talking about? Your boss?" I asked in confusion. I couldn't understand why Edward was angry. Of course, I have never met Edward's boss. I'm guessing that Edward's boss is Mr. Miller's friend or something. However, I guess my response triggered him. "From watching your behavior, I can tell. My boss must have mistaken and arranged the wrong person for me." Edward spoke with such force that he was practically spitting. "Gosh, a farmer that doesn't even have a degree? A filthy woman covered in dirt? No, thank you." Honestly, I never thought I'd be spoken to so harshly upon our first meeting, and I was so surprised that I couldn't find any words to say. However, as I started to process all that he had just said, my anger began to simmer. It was him who mistook me for a corporate heiress, although I even handed him a brief document about me. So why was I getting yelled at like this? What's wrong with being a farmer? Suppressing my rage, I tried to respond as calmly as possible. "I'm glad to hear you say that. After hearing your comments, I feel strongly inclined to decline. Thank you for your time." There was a lot more that I wanted to say. But I kept thinking of Mr. Miller, who has always been kind to me, and I couldn't say anything more. I wouldn't have agreed to this meeting if it weren't for Mr. Miller. I was never interested to begin with. As I sarcastically thanked Edward, he sneered and quickly left the room with his parents. He must have thought I was just acting tough, but I didn't feel like correcting him, so I just picked up the squashed strawberry that had fallen on my lap. My mother watched this with a sad expression. Seeing my mother's face made my heart ache. We put in so much hard work to grow our strawberries. How dare he treat them like trash? Right after the meeting ended, I decided to tell everything about the incident to Mr. Miller. When Mr. Miller heard our story, he was very surprised, saying, "That's not what I heard. I was told he was a gentleman." And he apologized to me and my mother. Clearly, Mr. Miller is not at fault here. We don't know whether the person who brought up the date had lied to Mr. Miller, or if that person genuinely didn't know about Edward's personality. But I know Mr. Miller genuinely thought Edward was a gentleman. Please don't apologize. It's all in the past now. I was planning to forget about the incident as a bitter memory, but then a few days later, I was out in the orchard when my mother came running up to me in a panic. "I got a call from Edward." Edward? I wondered why Edward, who had acted so rudely at our meeting, was calling. I rushed back to my office, answered the phone with a sense of disbelief.
What on earth did you do?
Before I could even say hello, I was yelled at so loudly over the phone that his voice seemed to crack. Surprised, I almost dropped the phone on the floor. "Why are you yelling all of a sudden? What's going on?" I tried to respond calmly without being affected by Edward's emotion, but on the other end of the phone, Edward seemed to be furious, raising his voice even more.
I got transferred to some rural, remote area with my father. You must have done something. I know it's you. Did you tell on me to my boss?
Upon hearing this, I guessed that Mr. Miller must have relayed my story to our matchmaker. He went off ranting at me. I waited for him to run out of breath so I could explain myself. Isn't it your fault for doing something that your boss wouldn't approve of in the first place?
Hey, so it was you, wasn't it?
Let me be clear. I don't even know your boss, so I didn't rat you out. However, I did talk about the incident to the mediator, the person who suggested I see you.
The mediator?
Edward's voice became a little suspicious. Apparently, he had forgotten that there was a mediator on my side as well. Initially, this blind date was mediated by Mr. Miller, the chairman of a major department store. Did you know that?
Huh? The chairman?
I could hear Edward's deflated voice. I couldn't tell whether he understood or not, but I was planning to wait for Edward's reaction. "Edward, you look down on our orchard, but it's actually a high-end brand in our industry. We even received a proposal for a partnership from a company where you work. Did you really not know that?" "Huh? A brand? A partnership? What are you talking about?" Even after I said all this, Edward on the other end of the phone was only getting more confused. Apparently, he really didn't know anything. In fact, we had received partnership offers from the food manufacturer where Edward works several times. However, to maintain our quality, it was difficult to increase the number of dealers, so we had to turn them down. When I received the blind date proposal and found out that the partner worked at this company, I immediately suspected their motive. Edward's boss probably thought that by arranging a date between Edward and me, they could establish some kind of connection. I knew this, so I wanted to refuse the offer. Thanks to Edward acting on his own, I was able to reject him without feeling guilty, so I actually got lucky.
So, what does this mean? I thought it was just another orchard.
His initial, confident attitude had completely vanished. His tone had dropped significantly, filled with anxiety and confusion. I didn't know whether he was talking to himself or asking me for an answer, but he might have finally understood the implications of his actions. In the end, there was one more thing I had to tell him, so I called out. "Edward, the strawberry you threw at our meeting, each one cost $100, and they are not easily available because they are all pre-ordered."
$100 for a single berry?
I heard the most flustered voice of the conversation from the phone, which made me feel slightly relieved. "It's the best strawberry produced at our orchard that you look down upon. I was shocked by how you reacted, but maybe it's good that someone like you didn't have it." I vented all the things I couldn't say during our meeting. Edward was speechless, in shock, and I quickly hung up the phone. After hanging up, I felt a sense of accomplishment, and I felt like the frustration I had been carrying since the meeting had been resolved. According to Mr. Miller, just like Edward said on the phone, he and his father were both transferred. They were transferred to a rural area, far from the city center, which seemed to be a humiliation for them, having always lived in the city. As someone who's worked with soil and fruit every day and loved it, I can't understand their feelings at all. "Probably he will never be able to return to the fast track," said Mr. Miller. "Since he ruined our meeting that could have secured him a bright future, I guess it was a sensible decision by the authorities." After that, Mr. Miller, who felt responsible for this incident, asked me, "Could you give me one more chance? I will introduce someone I personally know well this time." So I decided to have another blind date. After what happened last time, I had no intention of ever going on a blind date again. But the man Mr. Miller brought along was the kind of person who could overturn such feelings of mine. He was an easygoing employee from Mr. Miller's company. He listened attentively while I talked and responded joyfully to my stories. And when he saw the strawberries I brought out, he was full of interest, exclaiming, "I've never seen strawberries like this before. How do you grow them?" We hit it off on the blind date, and after a year of dating, we decided to get married. "I want to be by your side, Jennifer. You grow such wonderful strawberries, and I want to help," he said. With those words, he quit his job, moved to our farm, and began to work with us. My mom also shed tears of joy, saying, "It's great to have such a wonderful son-in-law. I truly feel so lucky to have someone as warm-hearted as him by my side." I believe that with him, we can continue to protect the farm that my parents cherished. As I cherish my happiness with my family, I want to continue growing delicious fruits that everyone will love.